Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video, we'll be considering the poem Neutral Tones by Thomas Hardy. So Hardy was a Victorian novelist and poet, and for many he was an instrumental player in the experimental style of modernist poets that then followed him. He actually loved writing poetry far more than writing novels, but writing novels generated money. His perspective on love may have been shaped by two unhappy and estranged marriages, but he believed upon the death of his first wife that she was his true love. Her name was Emma Gifford. And so his heart is buried with Emma and his parents in Stinsford. Due to success he had in his lifetime, his body is kept in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. Now let's consider the title of our poem. If I were to speak to an artist about what the word neutral in a tone could be, they may consider it to be black, white and grey. But neutral has connotations also of ambivalence, that's feeling both happy and sad about something. Though the focus of our poem definitely seems to be, upon reading, about disappointment, with an attempt at detachment and cool contemplation of the situation that's being explored, rather than the lack of bias that it's trying to show us, through the title anyway. This poem hinges on the way we as people choose to remember love that lost over time its heat or passion, and specifically relationships that didn't last. We stood by a pond that winter day, and the sun was white as though chidden of God, and a few leaves lay on the starving sod. They'd fallen from an ash and were grey. Your eyes on me were as eyes that rove over tedious riddles solved years ago, and some words played between us to and fro, on which lost the more by our love. The smile on your mouth was the deadest thing, alive enough to have strength to die, and a grin of bitterness swept thereby, like an ominous bird a wing. Since then, keen lessons that love deceives and rings with wrong have shaped to me your face, and the God-cursed sun and a tree and a pond edged with greyish leaves. The poem begins in the past tense. We stood. And then it signals the location by a pond that winter day. It signals a memory of the precise moment they both last met. The pathetic fallacy that unfolds, that's when the weather conveys the atmosphere, of winter, with the leaves that lay. It shows how bleak and bitter and frankly negative the scene seems. There's no hint of positive feeling, nostalgia, and instead the connotations are that nature is dying. There is a starving sod. Sounds very depressing. And just to amplify this further, if we were to take an artistic glance at the landscape, it's drained of colour, it's barren. The sun is white, and there are grey leaves. It accentuates that love is missing too. Structurally, each stanza has the first three lines with a regular rhythm of unstressed then stressed syllable, but the final line doesn't follow that. Let me explain with stanza 1. The pattern and rhythm in the final line, they had fallen from an ash and were grey, is just 3 feet that hit really hard on the bleak imagery. The emphasis is on the word fallen, then on ash, and then on grey. And those images, when they hit home with the sound, amplify the disappointment and confusion that our speaker has about what went wrong on that day. The rhyme scheme also mirrors the pain and futility of things failing to grow or move on, because you can note across the whole poem that it's A, B, B-A, ABBA. And there is no improvement in the rhyme. It seems futile and it's almost going round in a loop. when day and grey rhyme, God and sod. Just something else to throw into the mix here, if we were taking the imagery back in time, all the ancient legends and myths of, like, let's say Arthurian legends, anytime there was bare land, barren, we would say that it was cursed soil and the ruler was powerless. It's definitely true of our speaker. They seem absolutely at odds with this scenario. They can't seem to rise above it. As we move on to stanza 2, we definitely get the sense that our speaker is fed up of the stereotype cliched imagery of eyes being in some way a portal to understanding what your loved one might be thinking. The speaker describes his lover's eyes on him, as eyes that rove over tedious riddles. She's judging him, and disdain is what we get from him. He's fed up. And instead, it's like her eyes told the story of how much this love was over. The specific words that give us that, rove and tedious riddles, it implies that the companion is totally disinterested and fed up. It's very emotive. It heightens feelings that seem maybe diluted by the title of our poem, which claims to be neutral tones. Additionally, Hardy is writing at a time when another poet called Lord Alfred Tennyson wrote an elegy poem called In Memoriam. And he has a very famous line in this poem that I think readers at the time would have acknowledged. The famous line that Tennyson had was, "Better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." It's a very different approach to how our speaker perceives things. Perhaps Hardy takes on a different tone to Tennyson, concentrating instead on the melancholy and emptiness of what happens when you're rejected, either by a lover that you have or a lover that you hoped to be with. As we push through onto stanza 3, we see death imagery is extended across this stanza. And there's even oxymoronic language here. And so an oxymoron is when I place two opposing images side by side. A smile I associate with positivity and life. Yet the superlative used, deadest, I associate with something not being alive. The smile in your mouth was the deadest thing. It heightens how hurt our speaker is, and how confused in recounting this moment. Just like earlier, when eyes are often used by poets to, in a cliched way, signal how excited a lover is to see the one they're infatuated with. Here we also see lips, which we associate with passion and joy and romance. Well, now the smile was the deadest thing, but also there's a grin of bitterness that swept across her face. It evokes judgment from our speaker because they're so disappointed. There's no passion here. As if that weren't enough, in line 12, like an ominous bird a wing. The simile definitely clarifies, through the adjective ominous, that something bad is about to happen. We're at the grave dressing stages of this relationship. It's also clear that our speaker has internalised this moment. That means just thought about it on their own and felt so frustrated by it. And we get so much exaggeration that stresses this is a definitive moment at the end of a relationship, whether it was ever romantic or whether it was ever just seeking on his part to be with this person. And as if that weren't enough, there's ellipsis at the end of stanza 3, as if we learn something slightly different. There's a key change in stanza 4. The key change that we get is found from line 13 in the final stanza. Since then, keen lessons that love deceives. And we get the bitterness from the assonance of the E sound of keen and deceives. The way it sounds bitter. And additionally, line 14, the alliteration of rings and wrongs, it sounds painful. And it's interesting that rings spelt W-R-I-N-G R-I-N-G-S. It sounds like ring, a symbol of a relationship hopefully to last forever were it to end in marriage. More than anything, the final images of the last stanza, they haunt us with an insight into the speaker's traumatic memory as we zoom out of this poem. Your face and the God-cursed sun and a tree and a pond edged with greyish leaves. As if that weren't enough, there's a kind of never-ending loop of images we're encountering that we saw earlier in the poem. The use of so many conjunctions that are repeated, like and. It's called polysyndeton, but it draws more attention to their uncomfortable familiarity to us as readers. We didn't want to see this again. We wanted to see something different, but we're brought back to the beginning. Once more, remembering the original memory that's haunting our speaker. And at the start of sentences and lines, as well as in a list, shows that the speaker seeks to move on, but is somehow crippled. Whenever they try to go against this memory, they're drawn back into the details that they really wish they could forget. The most impressive thing about this particular poem is the way that Hardy uses both sound, structure and language to show just how frustrated, disappointed and disillusioned our speaker is over this particular moment of a love that didn't last. It definitely does show that bitterness is hard to let go of. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?